Welcome to ¿Qué pasa? HSIs, a podcast dedicated to everything Hispanic serving institutions. I'm your host, Dr. Gina Ann Garcia, bringing you the news on what's happening in HSIs. Join us as we explore the history and evolution of HSIs, culturally relevant and liberatory practices, current and emerging research with HSIs, and the policies that shape servingness.
Saludos HSI familia, and welcome back to ¿Qué pasa? HSIs. On today's show, we are learning with Dr. Alexandro Jose Gradilla, who is an associate professor of Chicana and Chicano studies at Cal State Fullerton. His scholarly expertise includes medical anthropology, bioethics, political theory, decolonial theory, institutional racism, racialization, cultural competency, popular cultures, and futurity, utopias, and freedom dreaming for people of color. For over 10 years, he has served on the Academic Senate representing the at-large constituencies and is currently in his third year serving on the Senate Executive Committee. For the last 2 years, Dr. Gradilla was appointed by the CSU Statewide Academic Senate to work on approving courses for the Social Justice Transfer Degree, which helps community college students transfer to CSU with ease. He directs 2 Latinx Lab initiatives, Escritores Promotores, and the Social Justice and Storytelling Institute Summer Program, funded by a Mellon Foundation grant. He received his doctorate in ethnic studies from the University of California, Berkeley. Go Bears! On a personal note, I have known Alejandro for 20 years, dating back to my time as a Title V grant coordinator at Cal State Fullerton. I'm excited to talk to him today about the ways he has been enacting servingness for over 20 years. Dr. Alexandro Jose Gradilla, bienvenido a ¿Qué pasa? HSIs, where we talk about all things HSIs. But first, we're going to talk about you and what brings you into HSI work. So go ahead and start by telling us about your servingness journey.
Absolutely. I grew up in San Diego, City Heights. It was a mostly Latino, Black, and Southeast Asian with a lot of poor whites. I get admitted to UC Berkeley, which was a culture shock because at the time, in the late 80s, it was a PWI, primarily white institution, with a lot of Asian Americans. And that was something where I realized I needed to rely on community. And I had a lot of Latina staff and the faculty in ethnic studies at the time and the student groups. That is what retained me at UC Berkeley. It was not UC Berkeley, but it was this Latino social structure that they had built since the late 1960s to help retain and support all the students. I then go to University of Michigan, a extremely PWI at that point in the 1990s. It was very alienating. People in Michigan had no idea what I was because I was neither Black nor white. And it was just a culture shock for them and a culture shock for me. I eventually go back to Berkeley. It becomes diverse in a different way in terms of multiple languages, the children of immigrants from all sorts of immigrant groups. You see more Swana or Arab kids, Armenians, Persians. And so I go back into this mix. I end up going to UC Irvine for a teaching postdoc where I continue to see this new mix of students. And then by chance, I end up at Cal State Fullerton in a job market that is very similar to this current job market, really tight. And I get a job in Chicano studies at Cal State Fullerton. This is the start of my 19th year. And most definitely, that campus has changed since I was hired in terms of faculty, in terms of students, and the sheer number of students. We were just at the cusp of what the federal government and HACU defines as an HSI. And from there, we have grown to almost over 50% of the students are Latino, Latina, or Latinx background. So that in and of itself is a great transformation in under 20 years.
Wow, and you've witnessed it all. When you said that piece about Michigan, not white and not Black, I felt that, oh, that was me in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm like invisible, right?
Yeah.
A whole another level of microaggressions when people don't even see you. You're like, I exist, But yeah, that's interesting for you to see all these different progressions. So let's talk about Cal State Fullerton. Cal State Fullerton, as you mentioned, has been an HSI for about 20 years, right? Received designation in 2004, making it I call it a THEA HSI, right? The THEAs. That's a whole article in the making of how the THEA HSIs act.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We might have to write that one together. You've been on campus for its duration, right? That you've actually seen the progression over time from the point where you enroll 25% to, as you say, now at 50%. So not only increased enrollment, but also the progression of trying to embrace HSI, trying to embrace servingness. So talk to us about what you have witnessed in your time there.
You know, it's amazing because I try to think, well, HSIs, technically, I was in the mix when HSIs were forming in the 90s and the discourse around, all of that, but it really was not at the surface. And so when I get to Cal State Fullerton, I hear Dr. Saya Abrego and Dr. Don Castro talking about, oh, we got $2.3 million or $3.2 million for this HSI grant. And I was like, oh, good. HSI grant, I represent the H in that. I go, how do I get this money? And they're like, already earmarked. And I was like, oh. So that was my first kind of interaction with the whole HSI designation, HSI funding, and seeing that, oh, okay, there's a gap. Dr. Abrego and Dr. Castro did amazing work and they created amazing programs with that money. But as a new faculty person, not understanding how those grants worked in relationship to the identity of HSI was truly an eye-opener. It was like watching a parade of your cultural heritage and you were not allowed to march in that parade. And so for me, that was very kind of like, oh, wait, how do I benefit from this? And then I started seeing different colleges on campus that were not diverse, that were not very Hispanic friendly, getting these big grants. And none of the faculty or a lot of the students being served were not Latinx, Latine, and I was confused. I was like, okay, this is HSI monies. Here I thought, oh my gosh, we finally have funding for, the ethnic revolution that, my mentors have been trying to do for decades. And it wasn't that. It truly was straight up federal grant, just like Upward Bounds and the TRIO programs with all the limitations and rules and guidelines. And I was deflated. I was deflated because I saw, especially in Chicano studies, an underfunded or a defunded discipline. We could use those types of monies because we are a partner to HSIs. And for me, that was truly kind of a call to arms passively, because I didn't get mad at Dr. Castro or Dr. Abrego because they had their grant. They knew what they were doing, but the structure did not allow for the Latina centered activities that needed the funding to get funding. And there wasn't any urgency around serving Latinos, Latinas, Hispanics, whatever you want to say. There was no urgency. And the heavy focus on STEM, which is where I met Gina Garcia so many years ago. And that's the other thing I will say about Cal State Fullerton is the amazing team brought on through the grant that I've met through the years at Cal State Fullerton, mostly mujeres. That's the other key thing about HSIs in California, community colleges, Cal State. This is mujer driven. And in terms of the caretaking and the care work, that is something that I also noticed early on about the division of labor of HSIs.
Absolutely. I say that all the time. Thank you for putting an exclamation point on it. I see mujeres running the HSI stuff everywhere, right? But what you mentioned is it's often not only men, but white men writing the grant.
Correct.
That's
Correct.
where that lack of a Latinx, Latine lens comes in, right? Because they're just writing it to that aligns with the Department of Ed priorities. And as you mentioned, the one I was on at Cal State Fullerton was a STEM focus, right? It aligned with the priorities. We get the money and then it goes to those things, right? But it doesn't actually spill over to whole campus sort of transformation, which is my frustration, right? Same. We're in that same place of like just frustrated of like,
Yeah.
this could be doing so much more, right? This is so much more potential.
I mean, for me, what also surprised me was how the HSI monies enabled the silo culture on university campuses. So if you were all white science department, but here you have a Latino who does history of science, history of medicine, medical anthropology, you would think, hey, we have this grant, we're trying to build, an HSI profile. Let's partner with our friends in HSS, Humanities, Social Sciences. No, people were, this is my money, don't look at it. I'm not going to give you even a dime or a penny of it. And I think the HSI funding, from what I've seen on campus in the early phases of my periods there, it really just reinforced all the kind of bad parts of university culture where people weren't talking to each other, where people weren't assuming that stakeholders who were faculty in other departments and other colleges would be interested in the success of an HSI grant instead.
That part, yes, the siloing, that's a whole nother article to be written. That you're absolutely right. That is absolutely happening. And it's interesting because you talk about HSS, and if I'm not mistaken, Professor Castro, who has since passed, rest in peace, right, was from HSS originally, right? He was
Correct.
the
History.
associate dean, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's not that he didn't have that commitment, it's that you follow the money, right? You follow the federal designation, right? Like, and you have to do that, which is the conundrum of this work, right? And how do you bring
And
in that equity and justice, right? Go ahead.
no, and the social inequality, if we can apply that model to campuses, those departments and colleges that already have money and already have a grant culture, they get to make more money. It's almost like a repeat of our society. Those with money get to make money. Those who can't rub two pennies together are on the outside. So yes, interdisciplinary humanities, social science departments, minority focus. There's nobody who's like giving us money, right? Either through development or philanthropy or through federal grants, because no one had the imagination at the time in terms of what does true inclusion. Inclusion doesn't mean white faculty and brown students. It needs to be a peer level inclusion and an inclusion at all the tiers of university stakeholders.
Yes. Whew. Well, since that time, that early time in the university's history, you actually have been a part of several HSI grants, right? You've been co-principal investigator on 2 HSI specific grants, including a POA grant, right? That's the Title 5B grant, and a Haku Walmart grant for mentoring, right? For mentoring, and you mentored specifically New Mexico Highlands University. So talk to us about those experiences where you were able to actually have a hand in what was going on in this HSI with these HSI grants.
Absolutely. I'll start with the Walmart one first, because it was a very interesting experiment that I wish Haku would go back to. And that is, as a young Thea at the time, we were literally mentoring a partner campus that matched our profile. And so I believe San Bernardino Community College was also part of this program, and they mentored another community college. And then we were one of the 4-year teaching intensive universities. And we basically did a study of New Mexico Highlands. They brought to us problems and concerns they wanted to fix. We shared with them our history and issues around HSI, and we did mutual visits, and we provided an assessment of what we thought they could improve on. And New Mexico Highlands is a very small university, open enrollment. Students can actually go up the day before classes start and enroll at New Mexico Highlands, which is an amazing access model. So that not even, you don't even get a chance to like, oh, where are we going to place you in English or math? And students just show up the day before and say, okay, I'm going to go to New Mexico Highlands. It is tied to community. The community loves that university. People who work there have gone there. So it's an amazing place and space, especially New Mexico. I definitely can say I felt the magic, and I fell in love with that place after that visit. Just seeing how people were tied to the land. It's something that here in Southern California, no one's from here, sort of, and everybody's so mobile. But there in New Mexico, people have a sense of belonging in place that's real. It's deep, spiritual, and mystical. And we wanted to respect that when we did the report. But part of New Mexico Highlands problems was that they did a lot of work, but a lot of the work that they worked on and data gathering went nowhere. It literally went into like a hole. And so we worked on improving communication, figuring out a culture to where faculty are doing data collection and because they're trying to solve a problem. How does it work its way up through Senate? How does it work its way up through admin? We had one brother who biology had his own lab. He was paying out of pocket, basically lab assistants to 5 undocumented students who were Latino. And he was like, I had to get them hired. I couldn't figure out the process. So he was paying them out of pocket. And it was just like, okay, I'm into bootleg. I do a lot of bootleg work at HSIs, which is necessary to invent. But that type of bootleg is just, that would break most faculty, especially in California in terms of cost of living, et cetera. So that was an amazing experiment. They were able to come visit us in California and they were amazed at, well, one, Cal State Fullerton is a very well-run institution. Financially, we don't have some of the problems that some of the other Cal States have. So they were impressed with just our processes and how we flowed. We're not perfect, but we work like a city relating to a county, relating to the state. So like the departments are a city, the college is the county, and the university admin is like the state of California. And so we have, flows and we work together. And I think that was one of the biggest kind of lessons I learned is that you have to have a functional campus. Campuses, especially to be stellar HSIs, people have to be talking to each other. And that sounds real, like basic, but if people aren't talking and you don't have functional processes, yeah, it's not going to happen. And so they had that as one of their main goals afterwards, after we visited them. But it was one of the most powerful experiences as an educator to observe another campus struggling with its up and coming. It's way over HSI, but it was missing the servingness. They were Hispanic, historically Hispanic. I mean, they were diverse before the civil rights movement. I mean, that's how diverse New Mexico Highlands is. And they just didn't have a servingness. It's weird. They've had the population even before HSI, but the servingness was not there. And so that was that was shocking to see in terms of their inability to help students. This was early on. I'm sure they've completely changed. But the POHA federal grant was a very special HSI grant that I was thrilled to jump on. Dr. Catherine Powers from the School of Department of Music and the College of the Arts wanted to get a federal grant because Cal State Fullerton undergrad was an HSI, but our grad student population was a PWI. We had less than 10% Latino students at the grad level at that time period. She wrote this grant. She had the vision to include me, which I was surprised. But she, at the time, this was 2008, 2009. This was like literally my 3rd or 4th year there at Cal State Fullerton, but I had made such a big splash. She was like, we need to work with Alejandro and somebody in ethnic studies. And she says, okay, your role is going to be, we're going to create Chicano studies curriculum at the grad level because there is no diversity at the grad level at all. There are some diversity courses, but not like what you could bring. So it paid to develop a concentration in history and Chicano studies and in the Spanish department in the MA programs. It developed Chicano 500, a course that has been around since when did Mildred Garcia sign the paperwork for that? That came to fruition to 2011, 2012. So you can see the lag between the grant and when the course got approved. But now that master's program in 2024 is producing an amazing cohort of history students with Chicano studies backgrounds who are now getting hired at the community college. We know how hard it is to get hired in the community college and have the right degrees. But my former student, Carlos Escobedo, just got hired right out of grad school, tenure track at Coastline Community College. And they were impressed with the fact that he did history, but had so many units in Chicano studies at the grad level. that's what this POHA grant did. And it came at a time where no one was thinking about an Area F or ethnic studies requirement. I've been able to place so many of my grad students in the history department into community college jobs because there is an urgency. That's a whole other topic, a whole other podcast. But that federal grant did exactly what I hope a federal grant for HSIs would do. Really directly help students and tap the right people to be the advocates. And since then, there have been a series of federal grants at the grad level that Cal State Fullerton has gotten. And a majority of the team are Latina faculty who are involved at different levels of mentorship, program development. In fact, this coming weekend, I will be at Cal State Fullerton Saturday and Sunday as part of the new onboarding of Black and Latinx students. The program is called META, and that is also funded through the federal grant. So that's an example, ironically, at the grad level, where my expertise and my agency, that is my ability to be, I always call myself a community organizer. That's how I behave on my campus. For HSIs to work, you need community organizers, people who's like, you know what, I'm gonna knock on doors. I don't like silos. I don't like the segregation that scholars and colleges do. I'm going to knock on doors, and that is why I think the grad level grant experience that we've had at Cal State Fullerton provides a model of how we could and should be doing this at the undergrad level. And I think that's something that I would like to see, where not only you're doing services for students, but you're also talking to faculty about curriculum, about student equity. This was doing student equity stuff at the grad level before that became a thing, before it became hot as a topic. So I have been transformed by that whole experience. I've been helping grad students across the university as an outside resource, which is what I know in my experience. Students of color who are grad students need faculty of color who will protect them, advocate for them, mentor them outside of the grad program. And that's exactly what this POHA grant did.
Ooh, sharing all the knowledge with us. This is why we have the podcast, so we can share and learn about best practices, right? Because I think such good things happen, right? You just named really good models that we don't necessarily learn about if they're not, written down. And it's hard to write this stuff down because you're doing it, right? Like this is the easier way to do it, right? Like let's communicate it, right? But yeah, I know about that Walmart Haku grant, and I agree they should definitely do that again. I think it's a great model, that like mentoring, institutional mentoring, that is powerful. I'm thinking about who could I get to, I'm thinking Escala. I don't know if you know Escala's work, but I'm going to talk to Melissa Salazar if you're listening. That's something I could see them doing, right? They do a lot of that mentoring, but faculty mentoring. Yeah, you're like, knock on the door, Gina, call. I will, I'll text her. But she's listening too, I know. But like the idea of mentoring institutions, like that's powerful. And the POHA grant, yes, I wrote an article about that the grad level is not an HSI. It is not an HSI. And that actually, those data were primarily driven by the large public systems. And as you can imagine, most of those large public systems in California, that a lot of the data we saw that were predominantly white at the grad level were in our large systems that were already at HSI at the undergrad, but not at grad. So I love that. I love hearing that y'all are doing the grad servingness, because we focus so much on undergrad, right?
Well, because the need. I mean, that's like the title. That's where the floodwaters are rising, right? Undergrad level. But we can't forget about the pipeline, right? I mean, that's the madness of being a scholar of color in a minority serving institution. Is you're like fire in the corner, fire in the front, fire in the back, and you know what? You're taking buckets and you're just putting out those fires and getting people through. And I just tell people that that's the, I don't know. Maybe we can talk a little bit later on about professional identity, but for me, I hope this podcast gets people up and out of their offices, securing some time to be advocates, knock on doors, talk to people, build community. HSIs do not exist unless there is a community pumping the lifeblood through the HSI. We have to be the aorta. The university is not the aorta. We're pumping blood everywhere. And that's our role as faculty. If we don't play that role, and I get it, This is the era where everyone's like, I'm culturally taxed, right? You call it cultural tax, I call it activism. Somebody throws something in my court, I'm gonna pick it up. There's a lot of stuff where I won't do because it's like, no, that's not gonna yield change. But when I see something that will yield change, I jump on it. And I don't think of it as taxation. I think of it as my workload. And I think the university here has slowly learned I really manipulate my workload. That is, yes, teaching, service, and research, but they know that I will do other things to make Cal State Fullerton change. And so that's something that's really important too. And I think people don't realize that institutions are so big and bureaucratic that when there is a institutional advocate who's willing to do things, they'll actually let you do it because they're like, we don't know how to do it. So if you can figure this out, go ahead and do it. So yeah, so that's another discussion, but yeah, I don't want to take us off track.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it because I mean, this is what we need. We need faculty like you who are willing to step up and try to make change. But unfortunately, higher ed does what higher ed does. And you said all those things like research, teaching, practice, or service. You know, if you're at a research institution, you're like, but I have to write, right? I have to do research, right? I have to teach, I have to get good teaching, right? And I don't have time for that activism, right? And so we need more folks like you. So thank you for pumping energy into the space and helping us see that it can be done, right? You can do all of those things simultaneously. So let's talk about another grant. You are a grant co-PI on also a Mellon Foundation grant for which you manage 2 programs within the Latinx Lab for Storytelling and Social Justice, Escritores Promotores and Social Justice and Storytelling Institute Summer Program. Tell us about those programs and how they are advancing servingness for Latinx students and faculty.
Well, this is an amazing grant. The story is I saw that my colleagues at UC Riverside got this Mellon funding for Latino, Latinx focused research to mentor grad students, to help faculty form writing communities. And I thought, wait a minute, we can do this, right? And so I walked over to my then provost and I said, hey, I want this Mellon grant. I started showing all the articles about how Mellon had been working with these institutions. And then I started noticing that Mellon was actually funding community colleges and some other teaching institutions that weren't R1. And Elizabeth Alexander, who's done an amazing revolutionary transformation of Mellon and its mission, my provost said yes. She talked to the president at the time, and we put through a proposal. This was just on the heels of COVID, so it was all remote. We had to work together. And the overall grant focuses on embedding more humanities perspectives around Area F requirements, which is the ethnic studies requirement, adding curriculum, as well as doing some digital work around Latinx journalism and trying to get an archive for that. And so my work comes from the HSI work that I have been doing, the servingness that I have been doing already. We have, if you remember, Gina, we have the Santa Ana Partnership, which is part of Orange County's civil rights education legacy. And I was part of a program called the Santa Ana Summer Scholars Program. UCI, Santa Ana College, and Cal State Fullerton. It was a summer program. And it was so radical because it was about bridging the catch-up that community college transfers had to do when they transferred. And all of a sudden, their first and second semester, okay, what about grad school? How do we get your writing up to this level? And the Santa Ana Scholars Program, which was supported by Dr. Lara at UCI, again, RIP to Dr. Lara, and Sarah Lundquist at Santa Ana College, and Aurora Kamimura Jimenez. And it was an amazing program. There was so much love poured into that program because they loved the students at Santa Ana College. And I said to myself, if I ever get money, I'm going to do an institute like that in the summer. And so 2 of my programs lifts heavily from that era because the Summer Institute that I had, the Social Justice and Storytelling Institute, is a program where we expose students to humanities, social justice, storytelling, using digital tools such as Adobe, the Google suite of tools that are there free for students, and to learn how to speak directly to the public. And that whole kind of I wouldn't have been able to dream it if I didn't have the experience working in the Santa Ana Summer Scholars Program. The other thing that I did was the Escritores Promotores. Santa Ana College had a program called the Padres Promotores, where they train people to work out in the community. And when I was trying to figure out what am I going to do with this grant, because I want pipeline work. So I said, I'm going to do Escritores Promotores. These are going to be writing advocates, but they're technically academic advocates. And they would be grad students trained by me in how to do culturally responsive, equitable interactions with students. And so we have some, at the end of this podcast, you'll see links that I provided. The Escritores Promotores, we even developed, grad students and I developed our mission, our vision, our goals. This is no judgment. We don't judge the students. So if a student comes to us for help and they say, I haven't done the reading, we're like, okay, let's get real. Let's catch you up. Let's teach you how to catch up in the short window you've given yourself. So there's no judging. We try to do, because we don't grade them, we're literally supporting them. But more importantly, the other element that I train the grad students is how to insert race, ethnicity into different research projects, either a little bit or a lot, depending on what the prompt is for the assignment. And for me, that was really critical because many times students say, well, I have an assignment, but I don't know how to bring in my community. That's why I'm here. And I never get a chance to talk about why I chose this major. So we worked with the librarians. We got research guides of how to insert race, ethnicity into your research project, either a little or a lot. And the grad students taught them how to be strategic with it. It really is amazing. Those grad students and the faculty who work with them in the other departments are like, Alejandro, what did you do to our grad students? They are completely different people. In fact, they act like peers. So when we talk in seminar, I'm able to rely on them like a peer instead of this faculty student model that happens sometimes in grad programs. The grad students have found like their footing. They're like, oh my God, I'm an expert. Yes, mentoring graduate students in these type of pipeline programs, they have to believe, because I cannot have them, cling to me and say, please, Dr. Gradilla, help me. It's like, you have to start, you are the expert. You're in grad school, right? You have years of knowledge under your belt. Step it up. And when you hold them to that, those grad students just step up and they're like, oh my God, this is great. I'm working and mentoring with students and I get it. I see them kind of clicking on, and the conversation at some point will be, so what's it like being a grad student? And for me, what made me go into grad school was the fact that I had grad students all around me at Berkeley. Shout out to Abel Valenzuela, who's now at UCLA, and to Ernie Chavez, who's at UTEP, who were always at some of the undergrad parties as well as different events. And we could always go up and say, hey, what's a doctor? You're a doctor without medicine, right? So what is this, And so having them there was so powerful and so impactful because we were like, oh, this is a career beyond being a teacher, a lawyer, a business person, or a doctor, medical doctor. And it opened our eyes. And so I know having students be around faculty is important, but we're older. We are not able to do what a lot of the undergrads do in terms of hang out, their schedules, they're night owls. I'm in bed by a certain time, right? But grad students tend to mirror the same type of lifestyle undergrads have, especially the younger grad students. And that connection is so powerful. In fact, one of the Escritores Promotores that I hired this year is a student who was in my summer social justice program for 2 years in a row. She went from undergrad to participating this as an undergrad, and now she will in turn be a graduate student working with undergrads. And that type of closing loops is critical.
Yes. Ooh, you're giving me so many ideas over here. I'm like, ooh, things we can do, but trying to figure out, like anyone listening, like I mean, this is all servingness, right? Like this is exactly like, how do you center the students and the lived experiences of our students while acknowledging their realities, which I think you're really good at, right? Makes you really good faculty for an HSI.
Oh, absolutely. And then for my, so I want to add this point about my summer institute, the Social Justice and Storytelling Institute.
Mm-hmm.
It was a team. I had two librarians. I had Barbara Miller, who is our ethnic studies expert. I had Colleen Green, who introduced the students to doing genealogy work. And that was really powerful because part of, the existence of being a person of color is that we're disconnected to our history, our deep history. And we also had William Camargo, an artist who does a lot of great photography of Orange County. And we had my colleague from Adobe, Jenny Colson, who talked about how to use different Adobe products for doing storytelling. And we had Dom Magwilly from Asian American Studies, who is a theater person, who taught the students how to improvise storytelling. And we really just immersed the students in all those elements. But one of the things that I'm very proud of about this program was, for the first time, thanks to my colleague, President Olivo at Fullerton College, I hit her up. I said, hey, would you pay for 10 students for Fullerton College to attend my institute? She said, yes, just take care of the paperwork, right? So we had community college students this time. And I also had no GPA requirement. And I attracted 3 academically disqualified students who were kicked out of Cal State Fullerton, who were like, you know what? This program offers $200. I'm going to go for the $200 and then see ya. After this program, they discovered their why. They started their academic healing. I got one student who was a former student of mine from his freshman year who took an incomplete in my class. He's like, Dr. Gradilla, I'm disqualified. I can't get out of it. For those of you who know how this works in the Cal State system, once you're academically disqualified, trying to get back in is like quicksand, which I want to see if we can, I don't think that's a law. So I want to see if we can fix that because that's ridiculous. Anyway, the student was like, I'm really close. And so I said, I'm going to make some phone calls. And so I got that student some phone calls. He's back in this fall as a full-time student. Another student who had just, she's 39, been kicked out of 2 Cal States, but she had a lot of life going on. And it's like, for me, that's not academic. We're punishing her because she had life going on. People were dying around her. She was losing employment, right? So it's like, are we punishing students for academic skills, or are we punishing them for being poor or being first generation, right? So not having that GPA brought in students who were honor students all the way to the people who've been academically disqualified. And that created such a rich mix, because I told the academically disqualified students, I was like, look how you're going toe to toe with the honor student. Look how you are teaching the honor student something. And so for me, a lot of our students feel devalued. They feel humiliated by the institution through its policies, right? And this is an HSI. You can only imagine if this was a PWI, right? So we have to build those academic healing elements into what we do, because our students need it. Because no one else is validating, right? We talk about validation theory, Laura Rendon. When you do it like actively, that becomes really important, because the students are like, no one's ever told me I'm worth it. No one's ever told me that it matters that I graduate. And it's like, as faculty, that's one of the free things that we can do. Why are people being stingy with the love, right? And it's like, people, I don't like saying I love you. I'm not asking you to say I love you, right? If that's not your thing, don't do it. But there are institutional things that you can say to a student, you are worth it. Damn it, we need you, right? You're going to be a social worker. And if you don't do it, our community is going to be missing you. How hard is that to say, right? And so for me, that is an element we have to build. The scaffolding of any of our programs has to have those elements where we are actively validating authentically, right? I don't say this just to say it, okay, and now I need to say something validating to you. No, when you listen to the student and you hear their story, you say, that's why you're here, and that's why you need to finish, right? Because we have all these graduation requirements and people need to finish. Our students, especially at Cal State Fullerton, the ones who drop out are not heavily in the first and second year. We have a lot of juniors and seniors who drop out, and they literally are giving the campus the middle finger and saying, I don't need this disrespect, right? You are disrespecting me at every single level. I'm getting the hell out of here. And it's like, then those students come back and they're like, okay, I'm at a different place now. I'm less angry, right? And you're kind of like, okay, let's get you back in, right? You're ready to be back. And so for me, it's like, why does this institution do that, right? Why do we have, and that's what I think has radicalized me the most in terms of being bringing academic abolitionist perspectives to my grading, to how I interact with students, because I want to make sure that we are focused on grading and evaluating learning, but we tend to grade and evaluate the policing methods that we use on students. And so for me, that has totally transformed how I look at my role and how I see students in the learning process. Um, and it's hard because, you do have to grade and people are like, oh, university's GPA level, whatever. So yeah, this is not about handing out A's. It's not about any of that. But it is about understanding a C is not a bad grade. Yes, if you want to get to Harvard Medical School, whatever. I just think that at an HSI as large as Cal State Fullerton, and mathematically, if the average grade is a C, guess who the C students are? And if you have policies blocking C students from applying to grants, to research opportunities, then you're doing kind of a systemic exclusion. It's like, well, we're not racist. It's just the Latinos are not eligible to apply to our program, right? How cruel is that? How cruel is that, that you're there seeing this and saying, and you see the anger in the C. When you talk to C students, you get the anger because they're like, I can do this. It's just, I have to work 30 hours a week and I'm commuting 2 hours a day to campus. So what are we penalizing when that student has a C, right? So I've been so transformed by it, and I'm going to try to figure out ways to make sure C students, especially HSIs, which means that's us, how they can prove their worth and merit in ways that is not reflected in their GPA. That's why having those students in my summer institute, it's like, I'm writing you a letter of recommendation. I've only known you for 2 weeks, but I've seen you glow up in this hyper speed kind of a way. Yeah, I'm going to write you a letter because you're going to leave here with a letter of recommendation.
Ooh, I would say you're dropping mics, but you're actually just truth telling right now, right? You're just like, this is what we need to be talking about in the HSI context, right? Specifically with the kind of students who are in our campuses, right? Acknowledging
Correct.
and elevating those students. Validation is definitely in the servingness framework, but not academic healing. I love that. I'm like, ooh, that's one of those liberatory outcomes, right? Of like, that is actually liberating, right? Because people are so like, yes, I like liberatory outcomes, Gina, but like, how are we going to measure that? I'm like, does it have to be measured if it's happening, right? Like if students are experiencing academic healing, right? Like that is going to actually carry over to those normative outcomes, like, finishing, completion, graduation, right? It will.
Well,
It's correlated.
yeah, absolutely. Because I've seen too many students graduate who are academically hurt. And when we say that saying, hurt people, right? I've seen hurt people, right? They become kind of the controlling part of the system, even though they're people of color. They are replicating the system because they've learned to say, okay, I may not be, this stellar whatever, and I have the imposter living in me, but I know how to be a hard ass. And you're kind of like, dang, you need to heal. You need to heal, fix that, right? But when you send out healed people who realize, if I can heal 5 other people, then guess what? We're going to be surrounded by healed people who are going to be communal healers. And I tell people, part of my pipeline vision is I want to put out into the world, into the future I want to see. So therefore, you build the future today. And people don't think that way. And not enough faculty think about that. It's like, oh, I wish this, I wish that. Okay, we always bust the students for magical thinking. That's magical thinking, right? We wish, shoulda. Do it. Do the work to bring in the faculty of the future. You have to build that. You have to bring that faculty who will be equity minded, student success oriented, social justice minded. You have to do that. That's an everyday activity. That liberation isn't just I hope it happens, right? You have to build that every day. So yeah, you can measure liberation and liberatory practices and academic healing, because when people realize their purpose and that they are no longer going to be shy and wallflowers, that they have a voice, that becomes really powerful to see them kind of get that footing, and seeing people release themselves from that invisible cage is it an experience for the educator. It truly is an experience to witness when you see somebody, wow, that person has freed themselves. One student shared, if I can quickly get to this little anecdote, she shared in her last presentation at that institute that part of her undrowning story was she was not a pendeja because her father always told her she was a pendeja. And she said, I finally, in this last couple of months, have been able to turn around and tell him, I'm not a pendeja, and that's not who I am. But at the same time, she says, the damage has been done to me. And it was amazing to see the whole Institute seminar come to her. And we were like, we're going to take a deep breath together. We're going to blow that bad energy out together. And we're going to start saying, today, that part of you is not going to be determining who you are. And that was really powerful to witness. That's what I tell students, this is about witnessing, not just storytelling. We are witnessing. And the students were like, that was like, how could, because the students were like blown away. And here's the irony. She was a 4.0 student, but part of the violence, the verbal, psychological violence that she faced growing up, that, she was like, yeah, her dad always called her pendeja. And it just, this is what some of our students face, right? Nobody believes in them. So it's like, and so it's not, I don't say my spaces are safe spaces. I say that these are transformative healing spaces. If they become safe, that's on them. But I truly believe that we have to create these spaces where students can be transformed and transformative. Because that's really important. The students have to kind of form community. Because when students form community, they're like, okay, I got you, right? And seeing the students kind of like look at each other and be like, I got you. And it's like, that was really powerful. But it's something that is easy to do, but you have to have the will as the educator to do it. And it involves you to be vulnerable, and it involves you not having authority. And and you have to be raw and vulnerable too, in terms of, okay, I want to make mistakes. I tell students, if I make a mistake during this seminar, I'm going to tell you I made a mistake and then I'm sorry. And it's like, oh, they were like, that, they just have never seen that, right? And they should. I said, because if not, then I'm giving you a fiction. When faculty don't make mistakes ever, that's a fiction. So.
Thank you for sharing that story. That gave me chills. I'm sure people listening like, whew, powerful story. All of your truth telling is powerful. This idea that hurt people go out and hurt people. We all have colleagues on our campuses that are hurt. I think we all know that we can name those people. Whew. And sometimes they enter spaces where they get to make decisions because they like to have a lot of power. And one of those spaces is faculty academic senates, right? A space that you do get to be in. You have been in, right, for over 10 years, which I think is, I talk about it in, my Transforming HSI book, like we've got to get into Senate space. We've got to, get into the governance spaces because that's where important decisions are made, right? So tell us about some of the work that you've been doing. You are committed to shared governance, and been on academic senate for over 10 years. So tell us about your experience and how you've used that space to advance servingness for Latine students and faculty.
Absolutely. I started as an untenured professor, which I don't advise, but I was an untenured professor. They were like, we don't have any Latinos on Senate. I was mentored by a lot of the activist faculty. And so I was like, why not? Let me do this. And part of what I realized needed to happen was networking. These faculty had to get to know what a Latino faculty person was like. And so for years, I did a lot of, as a regular member of the Senate, I did a lot of work around bridge building, kind of marking my brand in the Senate. And then eventually I was invited to be on the Senate Exec, which is the executive body of the Senate, which has also been almost exclusively all white. So I was one of those voices that was there representing a lot of things. So like I had to represent all these different voices. Um, but it was definitely a great experience because it exposed me to all of the university. That's why for me, change can happen at the university because it really is not that it's not hard, but it's so doable because you have to know how to make change happen. Um, and it's a mix of things. It's about advocacy, diplomacy, compromise, conversations, and that's where you start to see that that's how you create the bureaucratic change. One of the things that white faculty know is where all the bureaucratic buttons and levers are. Um, Faculty of color, because we are so focused on getting tenure, we do hide in publication and research. At least I'm going to take care of myself, which is not a bad thing, but it's we don't learn the institution. And then we get mad when we don't get merit increases. And it's like, do you know how that works? There's actually a little magic step that you have to do. But until you get exposed to how the university works, you won't know how the university works. And that is, I think, in terms of my years in Senate, which I went off Senate once I got the grant, the Mellon grant. So I will be returning to Senate this year. But I learned how the university works and how it functions. And when they talk about the unwritten rules and the written rules, the unwritten rules for faculty governance are just as powerful as the written rules. There are a lot of building of social capital. So administrators love throwing little parties and they love seeing you at their parties. And when you don't show up to their parties, they're like, "Oh, am I gonna do for you? Because you don't do for me, right?" And so it's a matter of knowing, it's like, okay, what do I have to do? I have to go to this party. I have to go to this party. I have to go to this, event that they're throwing, ribbon cutting, whatever. And you realize, on one level, it's kind of like, okay, strange. But then I realized it's community building. And it's community building across difference, which is very difficult because you're like, they don't really get you, and you're trying to get why they are the way they are. But these moments of community building are really important. And it's hard work and it's not for everybody. But for someone like myself, I'm really good at this type of community work and bridge building with people who, if you don't tap their skills, may not ever come to the assistance of faculty of color or students of color. So I think that is something that I've learned, and I'm very grateful for my time on the Senate. Again, at a teaching intensive institution, Senate governance matters a lot. And this goes for the community college as well.
Ooh, thank you for that. That's on my list of to-dos. I got tapped already by the incoming president. Do you want to join Senate? I'm like, yes, but not in my first year. let me learn. I don't even know where the bathroom is.
Correct. Or the best bathrooms at Berkeley.
Yeah,
Where are the best bathrooms, right?
I don't even know
I hear you.
nothing,
I hear you. I hear you.
But those Senate spaces are powerful for everything you just said. Like if you want to make change, that's a good place, right? That's one place to do it for
Well,
sure.
especially at the UC, because that Senate controls admission standards. So if you can get on that committee to say, let's look at admissions this way. It really is a major artery, as well as the work. I like to give a shout out to my friend Ricky Rodriguez of UC Riverside, who is one of the few faculty at the UC system serving on that tenure review, that finance committee, to get people through the pipeline through tenure and promotion and more promotion. That is critical work, especially at the R1s, to make sure that people who are not in our fields to diss our work because they don't understand it, and to have someone like Ricky Rodriguez in those spaces and say, no, this person's doing great work because this is how I'm reading their work. We need that, right? And we need more people on those type of tenure and promotion university-wide committees.
Absolutely. So as part of your appointment, you are working on approving courses for the social justice transfer degree. Tell us about that project. I read about that. I was like, ooh, tell me more.
All of it. So I am currently the CSU reviewer for Area F courses, but for the last, 13 years, I have been a reviewer for what was originally called the social justice transfer degree. I approve courses. I help construct the social justice transfer degree. And then 2 years ago, we started working, now that with Area F coming out, we developed, my colleague Carlos Guerrero at LA City College and I developed the Chicano Studies transfer degree. So I am somebody who is I invest in the pipeline. So, I mean, I can't tell you how many calls I do with my UC friends about getting students into the doctorate programs and how many things that I do in terms of what do we need to do to get your students in from transferring, right? That is the pipeline work that we have to do. We have to talk not just to the people on our campus, but at the R1s, at the community colleges, we really have to do that type of bridging and working, because higher ed, we already feel dissed and disrespected, and so it's like we can't do that to each other. We have to be able to talk to each other and work with each other and understand what is our expertise, right? I always say faculty are like the X-Men or the X people, if you will, right? We all have different superpowers. My colleagues at the UC, my colleagues at the Cal States, and my colleagues at the CCs. And we all do stuff that we have our fortes, and we have stuff that we can learn from each other. And so for me, being invested, and again, my wife, Beatriz Tapia, is the chair of Chicano Studies at East LA College. So I am greatly invested in the community college. I've seen, and I'm jealous because I see how her students, they're getting doctorates and JDs, and the first thing out of their mouth at their JD and doctorate graduation, I have to thank my professor at East LA College. And I see that at all the graduations, the transfers, always thank that first person who believed in them in the community college. So there is some magic going on at community college, but we so diss it because it's the 2-year community college. But the magic is happening there, right? And that, right, what does the data say? That is the artery for Latinos into higher ed. So it's like we can't diss that because that's our institution, right? That's our institution that's creating opportunity. So yes, my investment to make sure that my colleagues can get their students into classes that will transfer for transfer degrees is very important, as well as helping them get Area F courses passed through. This is tons of bureaucracy. The Cal State system is bureaucratic and the community college system is bureaucratic. And getting these two things to come together, it's like, that's why it's like, I only do this work because I have ethnic studies faculty in the CCs I'm working with and myself, and we both do battle against our spaces to say, you know what, this doesn't make sense. We have an understanding. You have to follow this understanding. So I thank my community college colleagues, especially Carlos, in terms of who helped develop this TMC with me, TMC and the ADT in Chicano Studies. We are institutional activists and advocates, and we push back. And that's the only reason why we actually got ours done quickly, because we both had the same framework and mindset in terms of how to get stuff done. We consult, and with our colleagues. But this work is so critical because we can't sit back and say someone else is going to do it, because when somebody else does it, it's going to come out bad. And it really is powerful to see when you have faculty of color subversively working in the system across the different levels of higher education, because we need more of that. Because no one is going to take care of us but us. And when somebody doesn't return my call, when somebody, in the pipeline is dropping the ball, it's just like, come on, we're the only ones who can make things happen for our students because no one's really invested in it. And it's hard, right? What is that Kendrick Lamar phrase in his song? Ain't nobody praying for us. Ain't nobody praying for us. So we have to pray for each other. And I always tell it to people, it's like, ain't nobody praying for us, but we better pray for each other, because that is what gets us through. And that's why the pipeline work. And I think I've given people like kind of like a hometown buffet selection of things they can be doing. Do pipeline work, do curriculum advocacy, do policies on student punishment. I've done so much different elements, and it's like, but there's so much work to be done. And I think that's where we realize we need more people. All right, if there's somebody out here listening and you're like, I don't know if I'm going to do a PhD, I hope this is your sign for you to do it, because there is work to be done. There is work to be done in the community colleges. There's just work to be done everywhere. And whatever you do, love it, and do it 100%, not 105.
Yes. I too love the community colleges. I think I'm starting to lean with episodes towards more community colleges in 4 years, actually. So I'm glad you're here because
Yeah.
people are going to start thinking, I only think the community colleges are doing good work, but they are. You're right. There's phenomenal work going on, and they seem more flexible, a little bit more flexible, I think. Particularly some of the smaller campuses, right? They can move a little bit differently, despite the big bureaucracy of the systems. But absolutely. So you're right. You've given us a whole hometown buffet of different things, faculty in particular, right? This is you were talking as a faculty member, what you've been doing. One more thing I wanted to for us to talk about. You were recently a panelist for Colega's webinar discussing no sabo kids, right? Which is something we need to talk about in HSIs. A lot of the advocacy I've done around language has been we actually need to embrace multilingualism. Like we need to allow for that. We need to allow for that translanguaging, right? And we haven't actually talked as much about like the other. I always talk about the continuum, right? The other end of the continuum is that there are completely English only, right? A lot of our Latine students are going to be at that end. So talk to us about your approach to trauma and healing informed perspectives to serving the no sabo kids, or as we know, older used to say pochos, right? The pochexes, I
Correct.
guess.
Yeah. I think what I was able to do for colegas is kind of give the long historical kind of view in terms of the history of these bodies with different languages and how we got those different languages, especially those of European origin. We literally have had one language beaten into us and then crossing the border, have that language beaten out of us. And, it's just, it, our relationship to the Euro languages involves a lot of violence. So for me, understanding the no sabo kids, and I get it, and this is the point I made. The no sabo kids are kind of ridiculed by survivors of ESL, of all the ELL, EDL, and it is that what is that horizontal violence because they see, oh, cool, here is somebody who I can now ridicule, right? Because these students had accents, they were called probably barrio or border brothers or mojados by Chicano kids, right? And so this no sabo thing becomes kind of this like let's let's stop with the crabs in the bucket. Let's stop with divide and conquer. And let's create some political cultural empathy here in terms of those of us who have language and survived how public K through 12 treated them in terms of English language learners, because that's violence and we have to acknowledge what the violence they've been put through. But then those students who don't speak Spanish, we have to understand that. And then there's a bunch of us who are in the middle, right? And I think all of us are terrorized by the idea of proper Spanish. And when we think about, does that serve us at all, proper Spanish? Because the one thing about Galo or Spanglish or even the Pocho style Spanish is people understand us. And we have to acknowledge the the word I created, the Spanishes that we bring are legitimate. And we have to follow the model of our brothers and sisters in the Black community and do what they did with African American vernacular English and say the types of Spanishes, and I'd even say the type of English that we speak, needs to be respected in the classroom because we bring knowledge, we bring history, we bring community into the university with the type of Spanish or Spanglishes or Englishes that we speak. And that is part of validation. That is part of academic healing. Because I'll give this anecdote. I was buying something at the Apple store in Brea, and the guy who helped me was a Colombiano. He was a transfer student at the Cal State Fullerton doing music. His girlfriend was a no sabo girl from Whittier, right? And I live in Whittier. And he was like, she learned her Spanish, but through the Spanish department at Fullerton. And she speaks like a Spaniard. And that's my other thing. This is a curriculum justice issue. Spanish departments have to stop with the peninsular Spanish. Everybody who speaks Spanish in the Americas is from the Americas. So Spanglish doesn't look so weird when we actually say we're looking at the Spanish of the Americas. That's the Spanish the social worker, the teacher, the nurse, the doctor is going to be speaking. I want to say, pues, ¿qué pasó cuando tu troca pegó la cosa en el parqueadero, right? The person's going to understand me, right? I'm not going to have the Royal Academy of Spain over, oh, please use, estacionamiento en camioneta, right? People understand. People understand, right? And you could throw in some English words too, and they'll get it, Pues cuando ya pagas sus taxes, ya puedes, So let's be real. We know our communities, and we cannot have faculty in a department undermining us, right? And I just think that that's part of the academic healing. That's part of the decolonization. I use Linda Smith's book, Decolonizing Methodologies, not as a methodology, but as a spiritual guide of what HSI should be doing. When you look at her chapter on the 25 decolonizing projects, chapter 8 or chapter 9, that should be our guidebook of what HSI should be doing. We need to be helping students reclaim things. We need to start giving back things to students. That is part of what the HSI does. I remember I went to a study abroad meeting, and we met with people who were running a Mexican university in the Yucatan. And one of the requirements they put in was people had to be semi-biliterate with Mayan so they could speak to the community that was Mayan speaking only. I go, can you imagine if an HSI said people who work at HSI had to speak some level of Spanish or Spanglish or Pocho something, right? That's powerful. But that's where I think we don't do justice towards. It's not just giving them an education, but what is a HSI infused education that serves all? Because guess what? Southern California, Black people, Asian people, white people, we're all living in the same mix, and we all have the same service needs and urgencies. So being exposed to language and culture, etc., whatever that means, institutions need to give back, especially to Latinx students, things that have been recently and historically removed, suppressed, and give it back to us. We demand that the university give things back to us, right? So when we talk about reparations, it doesn't always have to be money. It is also cultural, social, and psychological. We want things back. And I think that's where you take liberation, abolition, as well as decolonization, because you can't have, how are we going to send people out to do decolonizing work and they don't know what they need to be decolonized, right? And so for me, it's like we have to give people back their minds, their souls, their bodies, their language, their love, right? We have to decolonize love. That was something that Emma Perez talks about. That is something that other people have talked about. We have to decolonize love because it's so infused with a lot of garbage. And to tell students, it's like, we have things we call tradition, but it's colonial garbage. So let's not carry that on to the next generation. That's why decolonizing for me is, when they say it's the land, I agree. But when you look at the history, it's decolonizing bodies, minds, and souls. We need to get, and the university has to help us. They can't be, oh, that's on you. No, that's your job, right? That's your job. And I think that's what's missing in a lot of the servingness of HSIs, is giving us the tools so that we can heal ourselves. If you don't want to heal us, fine. We will do it ourselves. Do it yourself is how we do it. So, but we have, the university, the HSI has to be the space where students of color, period, can heal themselves, decolonize and purge all of the negativity, the imposter, all the systemic violence. Needs to happen in the 4 to 6 to 8 years that they are undergrads. But that's what these institutions, minority serving and Hispanic serving institutions, have to be doing. That's what makes us different.
Just gave me so much to think about around the language question in HSIs, because it comes up a lot. It's a lot, right? A lot
It's
to
loaded.
unpack,
It's
but
loaded.
you just unpacked so much more, right? Because the first immediate thing is like, okay, we need a family orientation with Spanish, right? Yeah, do that. But there's so many more layers. That's not the end.
It cannot end there. And
Can't
I
end
will even
there.
say, even in our mainstream classes, we need to bring in language to even the mainstream classes, So you
Mm-hmm.
have to understand the key words in Spanish, not speaking it, but what does this word mean? What does that word mean? How are you doing kind of public health, sex education type work if you don't know the sexual language of the body in slang, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to bring that stuff in, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we have to learn gang speak if we're doing work on push-outs in high schools. How do gangs talk about X? We need to know that language. How are we going to put people out working with kids at risk or at promise
Yes.
and not know the language that they're speaking, right? And so I just think language in the curriculum and getting over um, the respectability curriculum in terms of, oh, we have to
Mm-hmm.
train them to speak like middle class white people. That's part of the problem because that is more indoctrination and socialization than liberation. You cannot liberate unless people are, empowering the language that they have. So,
Mm-hmm.
but yes, you're right. Language is an untouched zone because we tend to let that be the foreign languages kind of territory. But we have to march in there and liberate language because we have to say there's not one Spanish. Yes, you have your Royal Academy, but guess what? There's an English Academy in England, but they know to mind their business and not come over here, and they know their business not
Mm-hmm.
to tell Black people how to speak. So there are lessons that we need to be learning to say
Mm-hmm.
we're okay, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
we've internalized so much pathology and so much deficit thinking that it's like, are we ever okay, right? And you know what? For language, I'm going to say, starting with this podcast, you need to tell people we are okay. The Spanish that we speak, or the English inflected with Spanish, or the Spanglish that we speak is okay, and we can speak to people and communicate. People
Mm-hmm.
understand us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That part. This conversation has been so beautiful, so much healing. Thank you for coming onto the podcast and talking about all these important topics. You've given me a lot to sit with. I'm going to listen to this episode multiple times. I already know. But you got to answer the final question. ¿Qué pasa, HSIs?
¿Qué pasa, HSIs? HSIs will not mean a darn thing unless there is love, cariño, and activism. What my mentors taught me was you don't trust the institution. And I never got those angry old Chicanos and Chicanas. Like, damn, they're always angry. But you know what? I get them now that I've gotten older and been around. It's like, okay, I see how the university protects itself and leaves us out flailing as kind of like an expendable. So for me, we have to be ready and real in terms of what this university is. And I think going back to Robin Kelly's famous quote, can we get the university to love us back? Because we're always loving the university, right? People of color, we love to love. But guess what? We don't ask the universities, and I'm going to ask the university, we want your love. And we want it in an institutional sense and in an individual sense. And I think HSIs cannot operate without advocacy and activism. Part of why we're seeing so much rollbacks in DEI, in cultural centers, attacks in cultural centers, and ethnic studies is we do not have enough activism based in love and cariño, not ideology, but on love and cariño. We have to do what's right, and we have to act like community organizers. That's what our elders who broke the doors down, they did. Because the other thing that's important about servingness that you have mentioned in some of your publications is the outside community. When the outside community is guarding the door, the university ain't going to pull stuff because they know, oh, damn, we're going to have gardeners and truckers and housekeepers coming up here. If you do not have community getting your back and you're not collaborating and you're not helping them, right? If you're not even helping them, then you have homework to do because I can tell you I do the work I do because I have groups like Los Amigos, Orange County. They know what I'm doing. They support the work that I'm doing. I work with community in Santana and Anaheim. They know what I'm doing. So, ¿qué pasa, HSI? We have work to do. But more importantly, HSIs need us to move the needle, right? And I don't mean task force. I don't mean presidential panels on HSIs because the institution controls that, right? And so those spaces are important. But if there isn't a bunch of people outside being angry and calling out the university, then guess what? The president or the administrator feels no urgency to move on the recommendations of that task force. So let's commit to, bureaucracy is not going to save us. Bureaucracy, policy papers is not going to save us. We have to be activists on campus, and we have to push people to do the right thing and tell people, I'm watching you. I'm watching you. And for those of us who do social media, I will drag you on social media, which I do. So I think that's something that we have to commit to in terms of activism. And again, supporting folks like, you're doing great work. I heart Eric Felix at SDSU, Chris Salinas, right? There's an amazing array of people who are doing the deep work of what is it that we need to be doing. You all are providing us roadmap. Can we please do the reading? Can we please do the homework, right? And use this not just as academic things to cite, but to operationalize, right? So I leave folks with that in terms of that's what's happening at HSIs. I wish people luck who are trying to become HSIs, but you need activism, not just committee meetings to make it happen.
Yes, 100%. And that is what's up. Thank you for joining me today on Que Pasa HSIs.